Hi, everyone. I am Jeff Weiss, co-chair of Steptoe's International Trade Policy Practice and lead of the firm's supply chain team. Welcome to Supply Chain University, where we dive into the legal, policy, and advocacy issues involving supply chains. To find out more, visit our website at steptoe.com. On this episode, we're talking to Dr. Trevor Gunn, Vice President for International Relations at Medtronic. Trevor, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to see you. Really excited to have you on the show.
Great to be with you, Jeff.
Before we get into the discussion on supply chain issues, I'm wondering whether you can maybe start off by giving our viewers an overview of Medtronic.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Jeff. And Medtronic is today the world's largest medical technology manufacturer globally. We're manufacturing about 131,000 SKUs, and I don't have to define that for your listeners. Highly complex manufacturing in about 70 locations. Upstream manufacturing, about 70,000 companies supply us, which is about 3 or 4 times that of even the large airplane manufacturers. So, we were founded with a very strong mission to save lives. We were the inventor of the pacemaker, but we've obviously grown a bit since then.
Wow, 70,000. That is huge. So can you describe the company's approach to supply chains? That must be quite a task to manage, that many different suppliers.
No, it sure is, Jeff. And, with a mission-bound company as strong as it is, that's what makes it work, because the complexity is of such a high order. If I talk first about upstream supply, those companies that are supplying us, I mean, they're literally throughout the entire world. But one thing to think about is in the upstream supply chain that we are in medical device manufacturing. Medical devices are often implanted into people's bodies. They're not only the devices that you see in hospitals that are external to the body. And so the type of sophistication of companies that we're dealing with in that upstream supply chain, it really ranges from Ann and Tony's small manufacturing shop right down the street from us in Minneapolis that has absolutely unique manufacturing to the largest of the large contract manufacturers that are manufacturing sophisticated electronics for a lot of other companies. But again, spans the planet. And on the downstream supply chain, very important to note that we have very delicate technologies where the vagaries of the winds and the wind and rain and salt on the seas, etc., mandates that we pretty much ship everything by plane around the world. So extremely tight regulatory frameworks, patient expectations around quality, natural expectations from doctors, physicians that we are absolutely perfect to the greatest extent possible. Those are the type of issues that really pervade our supply chain in ways that perhaps many people deal with supply chains don't think about. We can't be wrong.
Right. And do small and medium-sized enterprises play a large role in your supply chains? You mentioned, one example earlier.
Massive role, Jeff. I can't, I'd say for the medical technology industry in general, just as opposed to the pharmaceutical industry being largely made of the final manufacturers being largely the large companies. Here, even in the downstream piece, right, the companies that are actually producing the devices, the vast majority of these companies, final producers, are small, medium-sized companies. About 85% of literally probably 10,000 companies globally. But that's equally reflected in the upstream supply chain. I would even say it's probably even higher than that up in the upstream supply chain, because there's so many unique components, so many unique metals, so many chemicals, processes, and a lot of different production techniques, frankly, that exist in no other industry, and often don't exist out of a particular factory. I always think about all the unique things I saw. We have a battery manufacturing facility about 1,000 employees, in a place called Brooklyn Park in Minnesota. It's the best manufacturing tour on the planet. Not many people see it, but you go into that plant and you're looking at every single, literally, we're talking about unique manufacturing specific to that plant that almost exists in no other facility in the world. So those are small, medium-sized companies putting this stuff together, putting their know-how together, their knowledge of battery manufacturing technology, chemicals, and we're talking about devices that end up lasting in people's bodies, with literally a battery that can last 10 to 12 years.
And so you're looking at, obviously, safety and effectiveness, obviously, like I said, high quality. There are very high expectations. On top of that, there's also ESG principles. And how is Medtronic incorporating those principles in its supply chains?
Well, I'm really proud to sit, Jeff, on our sustainability committee, which is led by our CFO, Karen Parkhill. Look, I think the definition of ESG is evolving literally every day that we live on this planet. But the wonderful thing in general about ESG is the fact that it's not just seen as only tree hugging. Maybe it starts with tree hugging, but it really pervades all areas of corporate life today and goes down to the issue of even patient access to our technologies, right? You could maybe reflect it more like it's a part of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that were developed by the United Nations. So it really impacts upon almost everything that we do today is almost seen through a broader, i.e. not just environmental sustainability, but a much broader lens. We're seeing this, Jeff, really start to be meaningful. If I speak just of supply chains very, very specifically, we're starting to see it be meaningful, particularly in Europe, where European countries, let's say Norway, Sweden, other countries are now starting to actually mandate companies fill out an ESG-like questionnaire. 30 questions we probably would not have seen 2 or 3 years ago. And if you answer no to one of those questions, you're no longer qualified as a supplier to the public healthcare systems and the procurement systems in those particular countries. You start to see things like, I call them sustainability inspections. We know a lot about FDA inspections. We understand that, and we so respect those inspections. But we're talking about ESG-like or sustainability inspection, where those same procurement agencies will be asking all sorts of those same questions, but on location in some of our plants, right? So these are really, really interesting areas. And by the way, let me just speak about the UN. We've seen an organization called UN, it used to be called the UN Operational Project Services, UNOPS, has done a lot of procurement, even starting, with things that people could probably relate to, the big tsunami in Indonesia, in Southeast Asia that happened many years ago. They were responsible for rebuilding Sri Lanka, big pieces of Sri Lanka after that tsunami hit. But they've been equally incredibly impactful here in the COVID-19 crisis. And they are asking those same exact questions, going through those sustainability questions to see if you qualify or don't qualify. So that's where, some of those near-term impacts are happening. And it's great. Folks everyone's taking it a lot more seriously now. And it goes from the mine in Africa all the way down to to our supply chains that are supplying the consumer and the hospitals in which we're, being honored to help perform operations.
Yeah, you mentioned, Europe earlier, and I know, Germany just passed the Supply Chain Act, which is very expansive, and we're expecting, I think, in October, a proposal from the European Commission on supply chain due diligence. And again, like sustainability, as you said, it's getting broader and broader by the day. So there's going to be a lot more requirements in this space. You also mentioned the UN SDGs, and I'm wondering, what type of work the industry is doing with international organizations to help meet the UN SDGs.
Yeah, no, I mean it's just a great question, Jeff. At every presentation I hold together with our partners in the different UN agencies, be it WHO, WTO, UNOPS, you name it, we start with the SDGs. In fact, we start our presentations with the SDGs. Of course, we're wed to all 17 of those SDGs. And as you know, they affect, everything from clean water, education, really all elements of society. But we're particularly focused on number 3, which is around health, and particularly around the non-communicable disease goal, which is 3.4. And then you have what's very important for us around universal health care. It's not a question of political debate, and it's not a question of what be private versus public. That's not the question, but that we think it's we need to get in and dig in and do all humanly possible to get everyone the health coverage that they so desire, and have pathways to that. We had our CEO be the only private sector representative when 2 years ago this month. The UN celebrated Universal Healthcare Day. Omar Ishraq, our CEO at the time, was the only representative. But we also think a lot about Goal 17, which is around partnerships. We'd like to see a lot more of these things happening in health. We realize that PPPs, or partnerships, to put it bluntly, have happened in a lot of other industries around the world, be it rail, be it roads, toll roads. So there's a lot of really interesting things happen around the world, but the reality is that they're very, very slow in coming to healthcare. There's a lot of maybe distrust between the public and the private sectors that maybe starts. Maybe there's a lack of legal basis that some governments feel for, i.e., maybe a lack of a PPP law. And even if they have the PPP law, it might not be specific to or applicable to, as they feel, to the type of PPPs that we're trying to negotiate. But that's really, I think the SDGs are really, that's what gets you up in the morning. Gets you up in the morning, and I feel that Medtronic, and I say you talked about the medical technology. I think the medical technology industry in general is a very clean industry, highly ethical, and really I think it's going to thrive in a high quality environment where a lot of these demands appear to be coming at us and may be difficult to meet. But you start looking much more closely and you realize, wow, we're already doing that. We need to make some tweaks here. We need to make some improvements here. We can be more aspirational here, but we also need to, hear from the community that those same goals are being measured, and that people have common measurement tools to aspire to or to adhere to in certain cases. That could come from Wall Street or any of the other rating groups that are out there. So, let me keep it there. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, that's great work that you're doing. Given that it's September 2021, I have to ask you, COVID, how has the pandemic impacted your supply chains?
Yeah, COVID, I mean, being that Medtronic is not only the world's largest medical technology company, but we're the largest producer of medical technologies for respiratory illnesses, we're not the largest producer of ventilators, but it's within a group of other technologies that are used to recuperate patients within the ICU and elsewhere. It's what we've been living day and night, Jeff. And I have to say it's such an incredible honor to be sitting at a company and working at a company. We all work long hours, but with the positive energy that we're not just watching this thing happen in front of us, that we literally can every moment and with every ounce of our being can actually make a difference with some of our actions. So so it's really transformed us. I think it's also made our industry a lot more, and I often talk about our industry, made it a lot more visible. The medical technology is a little bit mysterious, right? And some of us would even confuse us with the pharmaceutical industry. Now they at least understand this is a ventilator. This is what function it has. This is, how complex it actually can be. So it's really helped to explain our mission, the things that pretty much only doctors and ICU nurses, I think, to a much, much broader population, Jeff. And at the end of the day, I think we've made a real difference. Unfortunately, we're smack in the middle of it still, we feel. And I think we're going to continue to have to make that difference, unfortunately, for quite some time here, as we, pray and work hard to get out of it.
What types of logistical constraints have you been faced with, and how have you overcome those?
Right. I maybe segment them into kind of a couple different areas. One that you would predict, and one that's a little bit less easy to predict, perhaps. Let's call it, physical infrastructure or things related to the physical environment. But then let's talk about the human environment. The physical environment, we've been faced with a lot of issues. So, I mean, as an example, multiple times over the past 18 months, let's say 18 months, we've been faced with factory closures. Factory closure because of different issues. And we're talking even some factories that have been producing specific technologies to ventilators. So a government will go in and all well-meaning, I might add, does these, work stoppages. And we still got some of them, going on and off today, particularly in Asia, but not only in Asia. That with real-time supply chains as they are, we've been multiple times very, very close to having to stop production of some of these things or try to figure out what do we do now. Wow. And we're dealing with those issues on a real-time basis. But then there's the human issues relative to this, right? Because at the end of the day, you have people having to come into these factories, right? And you have a whole sort of physical environment relative to those human beings. And that's been a big problem. Sometimes we can only work at 60% capacity because they only have the capacity to test at 60% or something like this, right? So we have to adjust in almost a real-time way. And the governments often are not giving warning of when, say, they're going to close the border between two countries. And that's been a major, major issue for us. So we fared well, thank God, till today. But it's something that kind of keeps us up a lot of long nights.
Are there any key takeaways, from, how the company has responded to, the pandemic? And I'm wondering, there are going to be a lot of things happening, right? Whether it's congestion, geopolitical developments, cyber issues, severe weather events, maybe other public health crises. I'm wondering, how have the lessons you've learned from this, how do you think you can apply them to addressing some of these other things that unfortunately are likely to come about in the next few years?
Yeah, I think even starting with the last administration, I think we know supply chains and we know ourselves better than we did, even say 5 or 6 years ago. And COVID has just, accelerated that learning. And accelerated that learning so that all different parts of the company understand supply chain. They understand where things come from. They understand where things are going to. They understand how things are getting paid or not paid. In a totally different way than we did before. And I do think it has applicability to future crises, whatever their ilk. What I would say is that people, at the end of the day, you need to understand the industry for what it is and not what it isn't. I come back to this question of our confusion between the medical technology industry and other industries. People really need to understand our industry and understand what drives us and holds us back. And I think that's really, really, really important. That is a big lesson coming out of this. Is that the drivers for the industry, the inhibitors of the industry to do things are very specific to our industry. And I'd say it's probably a lot more like IT than we are other industries. And if you understand that's been a big lesson. I certainly think it's accented our need to look for contingency plans. And I think that's going to continue to be the case with a lot of different potential, but looking more broadly at our upstream supply chain. So I think that it's taught us a lot. I don't think to be honest with you, I think that those lessons are just going to continue because we haven't had enough opportunity really even to catch our breath in all of this. So I think there's a lot more to come, and a lot more lessons to learn. But it just feels like we're just pumping so hard through all of this that we'd like to believe we're taking full account of the applicability of the present disaster really to future disasters. But I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, I'm having flashbacks to when I worked on TBT issues at USTR because there were a number of times when I would talk to you and Ralph Ives, about that. So many times the issue was that the foreign regulator was regulating medical devices like they were pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
And that happened so many times. So this, I take it that's still an issue.
Yeah.
That was always a big thing, that they're just fundamentally just different industries. Turning to, I guess, so how do we handle these kinds of issues in the future? What do you think the federal government's role should be? How can they help maybe address some of these supply chain issues?
I think, I hate to come back to this issue of education, but I do think education is critical, because then I think at the end of the day we're going to have well-educated decision makers, and that's not just the U.S. government. That goes to pretty much every government on the planet, because they understand the industry, they understand the constraints, they understand the catalytic factors. They're going to have a lot more realistic view of what's actually possible, and then their actions will be a lot better informed and won't actually end up unintentionally disrupting things that they actually intended to help with. So I think education and training is tremendous, and I think our industry, Jeff, is very, very willing to give those tours, to welcome people under the right circumstances to our facilities. I would guess that some of the other medical technology companies are there as well. I think another thing is to realize that there are probably some big limits to how much sort of localization can actually be done in particular countries. I mean, in my job, we have responsibility in our 160 countries of operation, and what the question that our friends in the U.S. government that are really working so hard and have with such dedication, those are the same questions that our friends at almost every other government in the world are asking. Why can't you put a plant here? Thinking that at the end of the day, that is going to eliminate the risk of the same thing that we saw 18 months ago. I'd like to believe that would be the case. I would like to believe at the same time that actually would fix the problem. And I'd like to believe also that was realistic. But companies can't produce the same technology in 160 countries. And those are really difficult lessons to remember. So I think at the end of the day, we have to create we are a large public company. We need at the end of the day to be able to explain to our investors what we're doing and to make predictable moves within that space. We're not a consumer goods company that can go and make toothpaste in 100 countries. So people may have unrealistic expectations of what we can do as an industry, certainly as Medtronic.
Right. And on the education side, I mean, can you provide some examples of how maybe the lack of government understanding to your industry, how your supply chains work, has created unintended obstacles to trade, and maybe even that have even impacted public health outcomes? I mean, it sounds like, one example is this, the drive to localize production and not understanding that just putting the one plant there is not going to solve the problem given the complexity of the supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jeff, you said it, during your time at USTR, we worked closely together, and deeply appreciative of your service there, because, they're going to listen to the U.S. government before they're going to listen to us. At the end of the day, you're going to be, we don't want these things to end up in the WTO or any other thing, but governments completely with all goodwill in their minds and in their hearts will get up in the morning and say, hey, we want to regulate all health technologies within our market, and then they immediately thereafter try to make a pharmaceutical law applicable to the medical technology area. Now, this may sound like I'm singling out Africa, but I think it is applicable to Africa. We've got 5 countries in sub-Saharan Africa that have good medical technology regulations in the way that we would think. It both provides access, but also provides the kind of safety and security mindedness that governments have to expect, and amongst the patients. Most importantly, that type of confidence level. But the vast majority of countries in sub-Saharan Africa don't. They have a pharmaceutical authority. They're operating under a pharmaceutical law. The individuals that are literally reviewing the applications for regulatory approval are biochemical engineers, which would not get you very far when it comes to our particular industry. Very smart people, but just inapplicable, right? You want electrical engineers, biomedical engineers instead. And thus, they're misregulated or underregulated in our industry. That provides a dramatic impact upon these African countries. Number one, Jeff, and they may not think of it this way, but it actually impedes their own innovation. We love African innovation. We love Africa. But a medical device is not going to be made in Africa if they, or be brought to world markets that emanates from Africa if they don't have the right regulatory regime in the country, right? Number two, it means also that medical devices are coming into some of these African countries a little bit through the back door, right? That don't have that regulatory approval. So that has direct implications on public health. Some of those devices may be expired. Some of those, even though you have donors that are putting in a lot of time and effort into Africa, at the end of the day, very difficult, Jeff, if they, don't have that full regulatory approval and that approval has been done in the right way. So, unfortunately, this is repeated in several other countries in the world and several other regions of the world. But Africa, which I dearly love, and my family spends a lot of time in Africa, is unfortunately a little bit the case study, the vast majority of countries in sub-Saharan Africa for this.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is actually a good segue into talking about market access issues. And we're talking about Africa, and you mentioned WTO before. One of the big areas the administration hasn't come forward with an approach yet is China trade policy. How much? So I guess first of all, how much have the 301 tariffs from the last administration are still in place? How much have those impacted your industry, and how do you think the new administration should approach China trade policy?
Yeah. I think the broad issue, and probably my colleagues at ADVMET, our trade association, would be in a better position to give sort of an industry-wide statement. But I think, I think tariffs are very difficult to take off once they've been placed on.
Yep.
We, I think, anticipated perhaps that there would be some more shifts than there actually have been in reality between the previous administration and this administration. And so at the end of the day, we're blessed in this industry, and we've been able to absorb a lot of those tariffs, and we've not seen, I think, a greater impact. We watch it very, very closely, and I would say just on the tariffs issue alone. Of course, we would like them removed. Of course, we're talking with our own government about that, because we think that any tariffs ultimately are a barrier to more patient access.
Right.
In the same way that I held a talk this morning on the information technology agreement, making a public talk there that makes the same argument. So what should this administration do about China? Look, it's a profound and critical market for the whole medical technology industry, including ourselves. We're the largest medical technology company in China. We've got research and development center. We've got some manufacturing, and we've got some beginnings of some localization projects in China. And we've got, in general, a very good relationship with the Chinese government. I always find, Jeff, that health is one of these kind of protected sectors in many economies, and even in the midst of a disagreement, as you can say that the U.S.-China relationship finds itself in right now. Health, at the end of the day, most decision makers kind of set aside, put it on the side, and they think twice and three times about decisions that they may make that actually impact upon health, and we're very, very thankful for that. How long that situation will continue, I'm not sure. We certainly are worried about some issues going on in China, and we at the end of the day think that China listens to their population. They do listen to the world, and I think we'll be able to have an intense and long strategic relationship with China. But I think, in the meantime, there's a bit of turbulence, and we need to navigate through it. But we're focused on China in a big way.
Last question. You mentioned that you've spoken to the WTO recently. What types of approaches do you think should be taken there in terms of multilateral trade discussions, trade rules, to help improve trade flows in medical technology and also improve public health outcomes around the world?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. The easy one is to talk about tariffs. A lot of countries around the world still have very high tariffs. We were actually, as an industry, very well treated under what is called the Information Technology Agreement number 2. I was very involved with that, and we now have discussions around the next ITA agreement that might take it even further. So there are some real things happening there, and there's, generally speaking, I think, a movement in the right direction in the world. But still, we're finding that there are way too high tariffs. One major Asian country, 15.2% still on tariffs on some key medical technologies coming into the country. I think the second category, Jeff, is around technical barriers to trade, the things that you said, which is having a safe space where we can all agree, we don't have some sort of barefoot patriotic view on this. We're fundamentally a humanitarian industry, and we want our industry to be better understood. We want other countries to develop their medical technology industry, and we realize some of the steps there that they're taking are actually unintended. And being able to have a good mechanism to have a good dialogue before we get to the TPT or anything like that is really, really important. And I think the third thing is I think it's, we've been advocating for this, a little bit of a sort of an emergency response mechanism here, where issues can just simply be dealt with in a much more expeditious fashion when we're smack in the middle of a crisis, as we are right now. And this meaning, let's not wait for the committees to convene. Let's talk about some of these issues that appear to be directly impacting upon public health, supply chains, and the COVID-19 fight, and do it very, very quickly and expeditiously. I'm not convinced that exists today. I really want to advocate that be the case in the future, and I think that there'll be broad agreement around that, Jeff. Yeah,
that's a great suggestion. That will be an interesting one to take to the TPT committee. Really interesting. Well, thanks so much, Trevor. Really appreciate your coming on. It's great to talk to you again, and really fascinating industry and really interesting how you all have responded in the face of the pandemic, and looking forward to continuing the discussion as this supply chain debate continues.
Jeff, thanks for your leadership, and great to talk to you. Always happy to share our experiences, with whomever wants to learn. We're always learning, but like you say, we're having to do at the same time here. So, many thanks, Jeff.
Cool, awesome. Well, that is it for this edition of Supply Chain University. You can find this and all of our videos at steptoe.com, and you can also find us on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.